Wonder Woman is a good movie. Granted, it's not amazing. I do have a lot of problems with it, from some weak dialogue to some questionably edited fights, to the very, very, very noticeable CGI, but overall it's still pretty good, and has done phenomenally well in the box office, which is especially promising for DC and Warner Bros., whose recent attempts at creating live-action superhero movies have been less than stellar. It breaks out of DC's movie slump by taking the time to build up an interesting and relatable character with a simple story that still has enough complexity woven into it to feel like an actual movie. And it even does a good job of exploring a few themes like the horrors of war and society's expectations of women.
What is a secretary?
I go where he tells me to go and I do what he tells me to do.
Oh, well, where I'm from, that's called slavery.
I really like her.
Fantastic. Ladies, after you.
I do.
And while I'm sure talking about those would be interesting, I will not be, as not only am I sure that many others have already gone through these in far greater detail than I could, but also because there's another idea that Wonder Woman takes a stab at in this 2017 adaptation that is far more intriguing to me. The idea of the moral grey area. By which I refer to the idea that things are not as simple or as easy to deal with as they first appear to be. Many problems often have several, if not dozens or more, interconnected factors that are hard to untangle and filter out. It's a hard thing to come to terms with, and today I want to try and figure out what the movie has to say about it. And yes, spoilers ahead. Much of the early film focuses on an idealized vision of the world where it's easy to tell the difference between right and wrong. Young Diana, of course, represents this, having a strong desire to go out and fight and be a hero, just like her mother, but being too naive and innocent to realize all the dangers that come with it. Themyscira, the mythical island she lives on, is a beautiful paradise full of lush green hills and sparkling white beaches beside a beautiful blue ocean, where the sun is always shining. It was also created by the god Zeus as a safe haven for the Amazons, emphasizing the idea that this is a fantasy land that's sheltering Diana from the real world. And even when the real world and all its horrors break into her sheltered little bubble after a fleet of German forces storm the island and kill many of Diana's own people as they try to catch Steve, an American spy working for the Allied powers, she still maintains an incredibly simplistic and arguably unrealistic outlook on everything. She believes that if she can find and kill Ares, the god of war, then the conflict currently consuming the world will come to an end, because Ares can no longer influence mankind. This black and white thinking is reflected in the way the film portrays its villains in the beginning as well, making them out to be cartoonishly sadistic psychos who simply love to cause chaos and be evil. The film establishes Diana as the embodiment of idealism, believing she can save the world simply by defeating a symbol of evil. However, as the movie progresses, she starts to realize that it might be nowhere near as simple as she once thought. This idea is represented in the movie's colors, as when she leaves her home, she sees it fade away into a dark fog as she and Steve sail out into the night, and when they wake up the next morning, instead of seeing bright, vibrant sunshine like we saw in Themyscira, we get nothing but dull, cloudy weather for the rest of the movie, as well as a much more muted and colder color palette, reflecting the real world's general sense of apathy, which contrasts heavily with Diana's mystical homeland. The ambiguous nature of this world is also heavily emphasized by its World War I setting. You see, being first published in the 1940s, the war Wonder Woman originally fought through in her early days was World War II, which would have been a much harder sell for the whole grey area concept, for obvious reasons. But World War I is a much different case. World War I was a bit of a political shit show. It was a conflict that had slowly been boiling to the surface as various countries across Europe squabbled over pieces of land, military power, and trade, that eventually kicked off with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria. It was very much a politically driven conflict, which makes it difficult to single out one side or one country as the bad guy. Anyway, to get back to the story, we see Diana's ideals start to clash with the complicated politics of this world. When she and Steve meet the British generals of the Allied powers, she assumes that they are the good guys, and thinks that they will go out of their way to stop the Germans' evil plan to kill millions of more people to win the war, but to her utter dismay, they decide not to do anything for fear of disrupting a potential truce. She is disgusted and condemns the generals for being cowardly. It is one of the first times in the movie that we start to see that things are a lot more complicated than they originally appear to be. It's also one of the first times that Diana's ideals are challenged, and it certainly isn't the last. Later, when they finally reach the Western Front, Diana learns of a nearby town being occupied by German forces, and jumps headlong into no man's land and into German machine gun fire to try and help free this town, against the advice of the other fighters. For a time, it seems like the town is going to be just fine after being freed, until it is targeted for a test run of the Germans' new chemical weapon, and kills everyone, rendering her heroic actions pointless. When she kills who she assumes to be Ares, she is confused to find that the war hasn't ended, to which Steve tries to explain that sometimes good people do bad things. And her ideals come crashing down around her when the real Ares is revealed, and he explains to her that he has never forced anyone to do anything, just given them ideas, and that mankind's decision to fight amongst themselves was their own. This breaks her, which is symbolized by Ares destroying the God Killer sword, the one thing Diana had been told could kill Ares. Everything she's ever believed is proved to be wrong in this scene. The message of this movie, at least when looking at it from this perspective, is that the world is complicated. There is no such thing as absolute good or absolute evil, and such ideas are fantasies that we can only dream of. Good people do bad things and bad people have good intentions. The world isn't black and white, it's an uncomfortable shade of grey, and that can be a tough thing to accept. But I do think this movie tries to find a way to come to terms with that. Near the end of the final battle, Ares asks Diana to join him and help him eradicate the evil of humanity, but Diana refuses. She now sees that there is good and evil in everyone, and it is up to the individual to choose their own path, echoing a sentiment from Samir, one of the supporting characters from earlier in the movie. Everyone's fighting their own battles, Diana, just as you are fighting yours. And Diana fights for love, and believes that only love can save the world. With this, it tries to tell us that, as dark and dreary as the world may seem, the only way to cope with it is to fight for what we believe in, because it is the only thing we can hope will bring us a brighter future. And yeah, those are my thoughts. I am so glad this movie turned out pretty good. I think it could have been handled better, but still. It's just good to see that DC made an enjoyable DCEU film, and hopefully it'll carry on for the rest of them. Or maybe this one's just a fluke, and the DCEU is still going to be cursed by mediocre movies, but I like to be optimistic. Anyway, tell me what you think, whether you agree, disagree, think DC managed to make a masterpiece, think this movie's just overhyped, etc. And thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, then be sure to check out my last video where I talk about how the visual layout of a piece of writing can add to its meaning. And also to check out my new video over on Traven Streams, a full-on cinematic machinima about me trying to catch a thief on the Diamond Society. It took a while to put together, but I am really happy with how it came out, and I'd love to get some feedback. And if you want to see more, then be sure to like, comment, share, and of course, subscribe to come fly at me. And hopefully, I'll see you later.